Welcome back to the Allegheny Northern and N Scale Part 2 of our winter scenery. And I am going to apologize for the lengths of these videos. There's just so much stuff to talk about. And as you can see, dumping snow is just not as simple as dumping snow. So I want to show you fruits of our labors here. Now that some things have dried, you can really see how the road looks and how our slushy snow has, drawn up the side here along our plow. And then I want to take you down here and show you how our ice has sort of dried up. That's what we get our end result, where it's melting. And our trees, of course, which have snow on it, not equally because snow doesn't land equally. And there's our muddy hillside. And here's some fresh dumped snow. Now, the next thing that we're going to get into here is first our rocks and then our track. So our rocks, as you can see, I did go back in here and I filled in that gap that I told you I knew was there, and I filled it in with some of the AK Interactive's muddy ground. So we've used this before in the previous video. So this stuff is really pretty cool. They have a lot of different textures. And there's a couple of different manufacturers that make it, so you can find out. I like the AK stuff, but like I said, I think Tamiya has their own version, which you're going to see here in just a second, and there may be others, but those are pretty cool. And you notice that I put the snow just on the grass side of the tracks, not on the ballast, and then here on the other side too. I did stop at a certain point. It's not because my snow's stopping there. This is going to be a whole other section, but this scenery right now would be an acceptable stopping point for a winter scene. Railroad ballast does hold in heat, so it would melt snow faster than surrounding grounds. So if you are modeling a melting snow, this is appropriate. And the other thing that you've got to remember too is that when snow melts, it obviously needs to run somewhere, so it would be appropriate to put puddles along here, and you can do that with Woodland Scenics Realistic Water. You want to make sure that those puddles are tinted a dark blue, almost on the black spectrum, because in wintertime usually the light is a lot duller, and that blue, an icy blue, will bring out that force that perspective. But one thing you don't want to do is you don't want to put too much ice on your ballast. You may have some puddles where there's poor drainage, and you may have some ice buildup, but in general, properly maintained ballast is going to drain out, so you're not going to have ice build up here. If you're modeling a secondary line or a siding, that would absolutely be appropriate, especially something that maybe at one point was weed buried. You want to put some ice in here and make it look sloppy. That would definitely look correct. So getting back into this, before we get too far down into talking about tracks, let's talk about the rock face. So once again, we established a wind direction, right? So our wind is coming this way, which means because this is on the back side of our storm system, we're not going to have a whole ton of snow piled up along here, right? This would actually be a void. But you are still going to have snow that's coming down, straight down, and it's going to collect in certain crevices, right? And where that's going to happen on your outcroppings, you've got to make it. You got to look at how you carved your rocks, right? So right here, I've got let me get some light on there. Right here, I've got an outcropping, and that is sticking out far enough that there is going to definitely be snow sitting there. But somewhere like here, you might get a little bit, but it's most of this is going to be almost snow-free the way that these castings are, which for this demonstration I guess is a little unfortunate. But what I'm going to do here is there are several different ways to do this. You can go tried and true, and you can get your flex paste, and you can put a little bit of flex paste in here, and then you can add a little bit of soft flake snow on top of it, and that would not be wrong. But it might make the snow a little bit heavier than it would typically be. So we're going to do something different here. We're going to use a textured snow paste. And right now you see powdered snow effect. There's different types of snow. Once again, like I've said, you can get a wetter snow, a drier snow, and this powdered snow is perfect. This is going to be like a cold, dry snow that we're going to show on here. And It goes on just like the other scenic material does. It just, you apply it with a brush. And let's go ahead and get this, I'm going to get the camera set up here so that you can see me do that. And let's get some snow on our rock face. Okay, so we're going to take some of our snow paste here, and it's a pretty thick material, but we're going to just brush this over, and I'm going to try to do this left-handed here just because of where the diorama is sitting. And we're just going to brush this onto our scenery. Now it will brush, but it wants to be almost tapped more than anything. And you know, I can see a little bit here, and as you can see, we're just going to brush this off a little tiny bit here. This stuff is a little bit drier than some of the other materials that are available, but the important thing that I want to point out with this stuff is that it has a glimmer to it, right? And that's what snow does. Snow has a glint and a glimmer to it, and you want that glint and glimmer in your diorama, because that is basically what's giving the impression that I didn't just dump, white stuff on my layout. I actually dumped on a snow material. So you're going to tease it into a location or a pattern that looks right. You don't want it to stick to the face, because that's not really what it's going to do. And it's going to pile up a little bit more in the back where winds can't quite get to it. And it's going to roll off towards the front there. So that is kind of what we're looking for as far as the snow goes. Now, like I said, you could do this with building up your snow layer through the flex paste, and then your winter snow material of choice, whether it be your Woodland Scenics snow or any of the other products. But I really prefer this method. I think it looks better. And I'm just trying to get some of these little rock ledges here that may have collected some snow. You can change your brush size too, and that might help if you're trying to get some finer detail. But by and large, I mean, you're just not going to have, move the camera here a little bit, let you guys see this far side here. So we've got a little bit more rocks we could do back here. Let me get the camera reset so that you don't go flying off into no man's land. All right, here we go. And we're just gonna put some paste in here where I think it would sit. And once again, if you're at all wondering how snow would sit or what it would look like, and we gotta get some of this off here, you can always reference photographs. That's the best way to do it, especially if you're not somewhere where you can go and see it for yourself. And I know you guys are not seeing that right now because it's behind those trees, so let's bring you up here. And this stuff is almost so thick it doesn't want to come off this brush. But once again, don't give it a painted on effect. Give it some texture. It needs texture because snow has texture. Even if you look at a photograph of a field that's fairly flat, you will notice that the snow it has a texture to it. So we need to make sure we don't lose sight of that. Even the only time that's not the case is when it's heavily icy and it's got more of an icy crystal look versus a. But now you're getting somewhere with your rock face, right? Most of your rocks are going to be exposed. I'm going to go ahead and touch up a few areas here, clean this up a little bit, and then we'll be right back. Okay, so I've got my snow in a couple locations, and I glopped it on in some heavier places, and I know you see some of it is sitting on a vertical face, and you're like, wait a minute, I thought we talked about we're not going to put it on vertical faces. That is true, but what will happen is you will notice that during the freeze and thaw cycle, you will get a amount of water that is leaching out of cracks and rocks and all that sort of thing. And what it does is, on a sheer rock face like this, where you've got a lot of snow and moisture above it, it will create a giant icicle. And these are not the icicles that you are familiar with, say, that may grow on the side of your house. These are icicles that actually they stick in a frozen sort of wave down the, looks like a waterfall almost. And you usually see either a pile of snow or some kind of a water outlet above, sometimes a pipe, and then you'll see this giant cascading piece of very dark white ice. And it's just thick, and it's, sometimes they're cool, sometimes they fall down and slide into a road, and they're not so cool. But we need to represent that here. So what I've done is I've taken some of the Woodland Scenics water effects. I'm sure you guys have all seen it before. It's one of their many product in their water series that they offer. And I put it on some wax paper. And I've drawn it down into some pointy looking shapes here. And some of this stuff, as you can see, it doesn't really look like icicles. It's not really in the right shape. But what you can do is you can peel this off the wax paper. And once you do that, you do get a shape. And I'll see if I can do this with one hand here. I might need to get some tweezers. Sometimes they don't come off quite as clean. But once you get them started, they'll basically peel right up. And then you get something that looks just like this. And well, that pretty much looks like an icicle. So what you're going to do is you're going to take a very small amount of either Woodland Scenics. You can use the water effect, or if your glue is still dry, you can use the glue from the paste. You're just going to set it on the edge, just like that. Okay, and now you've got yourself an icicle. Obviously, our icicle is a little bit too long here, so we do need to trim it short. But as you can see, this is where, theoretically, if you were looking at a hillside, the melting snow would run off towards the low end, and then it would cascade down here. And then when the sun either wasn't on it, or when the temperatures dropped at night, this would then again refreeze, and you'd have your ice. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to trim that to size, and I'm going to hang a few more of these little icicles, and then I'm going to show you how to do in-place icicles as well. So stay tuned for that. Okay, so for our big icicles, that's what we're going to end up with. A couple things to think about is your icicles need to look not uniform, and they need to look like you're going from thick ice down to not thick ice, okay? So you're never going to have a condition where the icicle gets thicker at the bottom. So what you're going to do is you're going to trim these to make sure they come to nice points, so the water, you can visualize where the water is going to cascade down, and it's going to come into a point. I just knocked that one off, but you could see that it was going off to the side, and icicles aren't going to go sideways. They're going to follow gravity, and they are going to come straight down. So make sure that they come straight down when you are, this might have dried just a little bit too much to do this. I think we're going to have to reattach him with some Woodland Scenics water effects here. So let's talk about now what happens when you have some icicles that don't need to be so monstrous. Okay, so not every icicle is going to be this giant production, right? So the easiest way to do that is to take your water effects, put it on that same piece of wax paper that I showed you earlier, and just put a nice little glob of it on there for yourself. And what you're going to do is you are going to, first you're going to take your icicle that fell off, and you're going to dip it back in there, and you're just going to squish it on something like that. And we've got our point facing down now, so it looks a little bit better. Okay, you're going to take your small brush, and you're going to put just a little bit on the edge. You're going to come to where you want a small icicle, maybe like right here. And just by touching up against it and then pulling down, you're going to create an effect where you've got some ice pooling down. Now, I know this goes on sort of wet and white, but it will dry just like the other ones did. Once again, you want to make sure you avoid unrealistic shapes and textures when you do this, so this should be always in a sort of triangular point, and sort of heading in the downward direction. So you may need to move your model around, or you may need to get some other advantage points on what you're building to make sure that you keep that sort of downward technique. In N scale, obviously, these small little crystal icicles are real easy to make because, well, it doesn't take a whole lot of material to make it look like it's in scale. So you can pretty much get in here, and I see that I knocked another set of icicles off here, so we'll just go reattach these. I had a funny feeling that paste had dried a little bit faster than I wanted it to. But don't worry, if you use the Woodland Scenics water effects that you use to create the icicles, it'll stick right on there. It'll dry clear. That's what you're looking for anyway. So you will get the desired effect. Some of these larger crystals, I keep calling them crystals, icicles, they will leak off into other areas, especially when water is running during the warmer hours of the day or during sunlight. And this is a weird thing too. So right now, take for instance, outside it is 14 degrees, okay? But the sun is shining, so the sun's out, it's a beautiful day, it's cold. You know, if you don't have to go outside, then you stay inside and you model. But the sun shining is enough to start melting the snow and ice. So even though it's way too cold to have liquid water, I do have icicles forming on the house because the water is, the sun is melting it. And the icicles form faster because the water can't run as long, obviously, because the air is very cold. So you will get areas where water will settle and then it's going to basically freeze in that area, even if it's just dampening the rocks a little bit. So you will build up ice. There's many ways you can do ice. There's different ice products available on the market. I find the easiest thing to do is just use it, the same water effects material, and hit the areas where you want to see some ice build up. It's a very effective, very convincing technique. And where ice gets thicker, so some of these bigger icicles, once they're dry, you can absolutely go back and hit them with a little bit of white paint, and I do mean a little bit, make it sparing. And if you've ever looked at some of the giant icicles that maybe are along the side of a road, usually where the road's cut through a rock face, you will see that these icicles, they get big and they get very, very, very deep, like a glacier white almost. And so that is definitely an appropriate use of white paint to get it in there, but your icicle has to be fairly large for that. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to let this dry. This isn't one of those techniques that, once again, yep, it looks really cool and you want to do it everywhere, but don't do it everywhere. Just pick a few areas where there might be some water running during the melt, and that's about it. If you wanted to do something where you had a cascading amount of water coming over the side, you could represent it the same way. It's basically like you're building a waterfall. I would, in that case, use enough of the white paint so that you understand that it's not running water, it is frozen water. So, but we're going to go ahead and we're going to let those small little details dry, and by the time we get to the glamour shots here at the end of the model build, those will look just like the larger ones and will look like ice crystals. And for the larger scale folks, this technique is universal, but your icicles will be larger. So you just need to see what looks right in scale for you, and make sure that's what you end up with. All right, time to talk about tracks. Okay, so for our tracks, we're going to model a section that is clear, and then we're going to model a section that has been plowed, but will allow trains to pass it. And then we're going to model a section that is simply for show, deep snow, and that's all you're doing here. So for the deep snow section, it's the easiest. I've taken my flex paste. We know it's our basis, and you will know that I have gone very smooth. Snow on engineered surfaces, so roads, sidewalks, parking lots, train tracks, tend to lay very, very smooth because the surface is unnaturally flat because we've flattened it, and then the snow just sort of drifts on top of it. So very little features here. I'm going to take my soft flake snow and I'm just going to set it over the rails basically, and then we're going to lock it in place with our mix of gloss medium and water, and that is going to be the end of snow-covered tracks. Okay, so you want to represent an area that is completely snow-covered. it looks like everything else. It's completely snow covered. You can't see anything. But you can tell that there's it's mounted, right? So you can tell there's something there. That's fine. If you're doing a scenery, you would have a snow plow in here, and that would be what you would do next. Now, for an area where you want to run trains, like I have on my layout, this is a little tricky because this stuff, one, it doesn't like to be glued in place, and two, it doesn't like to stay where you put it. So you're sort of at a crossroads here. We're going to go with the Woodland Scenic soft snow, soft lake snow, and we're just going to pour it over the tracks, just like you were ballasting. Okay, leave it down below the rails, just like this. You have to do this while the scenery is obviously dry. Don't try to do this when it's wet because it's just going to stick, and my God, is it going to make a mess. So don't let that happen. We're going to take our very soft brush here, and we are going to sort of brush this off the top of the rails. It's not as easy as it looks because, one, it wants to go everywhere. So this is similar to if you were putting plaster, between your rails to make a paved section. You're going to do the exact same technique here. Okay, you're going to get the snow flattened off to either side, because if you are getting snow and you still have trains running over it, you are going to have a flanger or a snow plow, or just the trains going by are going to knock that snow off. Once you get it to a point where you are essentially below rail, just a smidge, now it's time to come in, spray it, and we're going to lock it in place just like we would any other scenery material. And you can see how, man, my sprayer's kind of gone bad on me. You can see how it's bubbling up here. It looks like crap. Don't worry, we're going to fix it in a minute. All right, so hit all that area, and you're going to notice that it's sitting up on top right now. It's got to bubble down. Let it bubble down. Like I said, you can't really, I have not found a way, any particular mixture that really gets away from this. Even a good sprayer sort of just makes a mess. So we're going to come back in here with a little bit of light stuff. All right. What you'll notice is if you try to clean this up just a little bit with your finger, it's going to help. All right, we need to get back in here and spray it just again. So see if we can try to get this to mist a little better. There, I think that might have, a little bit of cleanup here might have helped. All right, now that we've got that mess made, I'm gonna come in here with our 50-50 water and gloss medium mix. And we're just gonna put I like to use the syringe method. I know there's different ways to do it, but just like I'm ballasting, and I'm going to let it come along the rails here, and you can see this stuff doesn't like to go into the material. It'll sit up on top of it. I don't care how slow you go. It's just, this is the most painful part of this process. And I promise you that when it dries, you'll see how it's bubbling up there. I promise you when it dries, it will settle back down and it will hold this in place. And yes, we do have this all over the rails right now. And I know that's going to make it sort of nerve-wracking for almost all of you. But we're going to give it a second. And I'm going to show you how we clean this off. So at this point, don't try to clean it. Don't try to fix it. Leave it goopy like this, and we're gonna come back. Okay, so I almost forgot that I was doing a how-to video, and I started fixing things before I put the camera back on. So I realized I made that mistake and I stopped. So what I did is I went and I soaked the rest of the scenery. I fixed my spray bottle so it's not dropping giant drops everywhere. I fixed my spray bottle, and I came back, and just like we did up here where I added that last little coat of granulated snow on top of the wet surface. I did the exact same thing here so that I've got this repaired the way I wanted it. And now I am in the process of, this is still wet. In fact, I soaked it a little bit more, taking the back of my modeling knife, and I'm just moving this material away from the rails. Okay, you're going to have to do this a couple of times, and what you're going to find out is if you're on a curve where the wheels of the cars may be at certain angles, you may have to clear a little bit more of this. It's a trial and error type thing. There's not a good way to do it. It's just like if you were, like I said, putting plaster in there to make a paved in rail. The tried and true method of taking a rail car with the flange and cleaning up the rails that way is also the best thing you can do. And you're just gonna sort of run this right through there. Obviously use an older wheel set. Don't use something that's you know, gonna be one of your future pride and joys. And sort of form that snow exactly how you want it, so you can see that you've got a flangeway there. It's really that simple. And I say that sort of tongue-in-cheek because it's not simple at all. You are going to have to rework this several times to get it the way you want it. See how it looks nice and fluffy there? It's not going to look that way. I can almost promise you it's going to get very hard and very compacted. So what I'm talking about, let's go over to the layout real quick and I'll show you what it looks like on my line. Okay, so now that we're on the layout here, I'm showing you what the line looks like now, and you can see that the snow has been worn down almost to the tie level in a lot of places. Some areas it's a little bit thicker than others, and I'm going to take you along the back here. And you can see that it's worn down. It still gives that impression of snow, but this almost needs touched up again, and it's something that I will constantly chase just to get it right. But it does pose a bit of an operational challenge, I guess, just because there's some snow equipment. It's always fun stuff to see. But just because it just does not like to play well with the moving train parts. So there's always a battle between keeping things realistic looking and scenery wise. So it is on my agenda to touch this up. That doesn't really help us out much for how-to video, but maybe that'll be an upcoming, how to fix your winter scene once you've had it for a while. But this has been a few years in operation, several rail cleanings, and you can just see that it's from a winter standpoint, it's very convincing. The tracks look like they're going through winter scenery, but it loses that fluff after a while. So just realize that's going to happen. For the purpose of our diorama, however, we have an appropriate amount of fluff there. This is what it would look like in real life. We've got it's sitting up high above the rails, because don't forget your locomotive, trucks, and your car wheel sets are all going to be raised up. So other than the flanges going through the rails, you're not really going to have any other impact to the snow. The only condition where that would be different is if you had a flanger that was maybe cutting down just a little bit deeper in the snow. You would want to knock that off. So what you would do is, when this dries, do not do it while it's wet, because you're just going to mess it all up. But you would take the device of your choice. You could either use your finger, use sandpaper, whatever you want, depending on how dry it is at the time. If it's a little bit damper, then your finger will work just fine. And you can sort of push it down below the rail heads, just like that. Like I said, just don't drag around it, otherwise you're going to be really, really sad with what happens. But then you can take your, in this case, what we're calling our flanger, and you can just work that flange back out. Okay, if you are modeling an area where the snow has melted, you're going to want to coat this whole area in a gloss medium to give it a little bit of a wet shine, and so that it looks like it was wet or is wet. You are still going to get, like I said, you're not going to get giant ice pools, but you may get a little bit of ice puddling in places, just where stuff has frozen along the surface. Bring your snow in a little bit if you want, but don't forget, don't go too crazy because your ballast is going to hold heat, and therefore it's not going to be totally covered. Now, one thing that we do want to do, and I'm sure you guys all saw this coming, is that regardless of how your winter scene is set up, chances are your trains or your winter maintenance of way equipment has done some plow work. And if that is the case, that's right, we're coming back in with some shoveled snow, and we want to set that back away from the rails, because don't forget, most of the railroad equipment not only pushes it off of the track itself, but it also pushes it away from the track, so kind of out to the furthest extent of the right-of-way. And you want to model that as well. So you're going to have that wing sort of push this out in this general direction away from the tracks, give you your proper clearance, and keep it away from areas where the drainage might be bad, and keep it away from the track. So we're going to go ahead, I'm going to build that up, and then let's come back for the final touches here on. Okay, so I've built up my snow plowed areas. You can see that it's all soaked right now with gloss medium. I'm waiting for that to all dry. Notice that I'm a little bit irregular in the areas where I've got it melting, because as the plow has plowed snow, some areas would be thicker with snow that hasn't melted as much yet. Some areas would be thinner where the snow has melted. And then when I get into these areas down here where it's still snowing, maybe I'm a little more consistent, and I've put a big mound here because obviously, what would a snow scene be if I didn't have a snowplow on the rails? I'm not showing you that. You got to wait till the end to see it. But anyway, that's kind of sort of the look you're going to get. We're going to let everything dry. I'll let you come back here and see what it looks like when everything is dry, so you can see the final effect. There is something that I forgot to mention, and for those of you who are skipping the video, ahead in the video, which I know we all do, you might miss this, but there is a final scene that applies to the entire module and your entire scene. We haven't done it yet, but it's coming, so get ready for that. All right, let's move into our water feature, and let's talk about how we do snow, ice, and water. Okay, so as you guys are following along here, I'm sure you realize that the next step is we need to get our riverbanks finalized. There's a ton of different river conditions that you might have that would have totally different looks to it. If you've got a rock ledge, or you've got a muddy bank, or you've got reeds, I mean, this whole area can look way different depending on what your layout actually looks like. In our case, we're going to go with a muddy bank. A couple of reasons. One, it's the easiest to do, and two, it's for this purpose. It's going to show exactly the technique that I want to show you. So depending on what you're doing here, this condition may look a little bit different. I put the water in first before finalizing it. I'm using this thick paste. This is our wet ground from AK Interactive. I've showed you the bottle a bunch of times. You know what it looks like at this point. And I'm going over the edge. Now, one thing that you should know is that in winter, most streams, and I've noticed this, I think it's a factor of what's in the water at that time of year, plus the lighting that's hitting it. They take on a blue, almost a black look, especially if they're in shadow. The water looks like an icy cold water. It's not warm and spring-like. The bigger rivers tend to stay whatever color they are. If they're brown, they kind of tend to stay a lighter shade of brown. If there's a lot of runoff, then they might be a different shade of brown. But in any event, what I've modeled here is a more nature preserved type stream, so that the pond looks nice and dark deep blue. And there are a ton of paint options available for that. And what I did was I had a Tamiya. It's called Field Blue, and it is their X50 Field Blue. And I used that as my basis, but I also mixed in some black and some brown. And so as I show you the river here, you're going to see that all of those colors are present, but I want that dark look. And I put a coating of water down to sort of fill in some of the deeper areas and get that looking the way I wanted it. But I didn't finish it off, and that is because I'm going to show you how to do some ice on your stream. And once again, this is a little bit of an interesting condition because you're going to have flowing water, which is obviously not frozen, and you're going to have frozen water, which obviously, well, it's stagnant and it's white. So we need to mix those two together. There are multiple ways to do this. There are multiple products to do this. I'm going to show you one way, but you may find videos on YouTube that are different. And so I'm actually forming my bank with this muddy terrain building material. So that old line that you saw is not, I'm not worried about getting it on the water, so to speak, because that basically was overwatered from where I actually wanted it. So I'm going to make this look like mud. Maybe some animals have been traipsing around in it and stepping on it, and so it's not going to lay smooth. It's going to have some texture to it. I'm not too worried about getting it on some of the static grass because it's not going to matter once the snow starts to fly. And then that is going to be my riverbank. Okay, so this is my stream bed now. I've got my banks modeled in, and then I opted to put a little bit. I know this area is high. I wanted it to be high. I wanted the water to be going around it to show you the water feature that way. So I put, even though I had it painted a little bit of brown, which you can kind of start to see here in certain ways I turned the camera, I still wanted that to be a little bit muddier, so I've put that acrylic down. And at this point, I don't really want to go any further with that. I want that to dry. Once that dries, we're going to come back and we're going to put our ice layer in. In the meantime, I'm going to bring our snow line from the tracks down. No technique I'm going to use here needs to be reshown. I'm going to put a little bit of flex paste in some areas, not in other areas. It's going to be a combination basically just like this, where some of it is melted, some of it's not melted, to show you what this all looks like. So I'm going to get this scene completed so that we've got nothing but our river left. Okay, so as we're letting our banks dry here, we have our next layer of realistic water poured. And while it's still wet, I do have a little bit here on the muddy bank. And yep, you've got it right. We're going to go ahead and add our ice crystals yet again, just to make this look like a sloppy mess. I'm not trying to necessarily make the whole thing look frozen. I just want that little area there to look like ice. And that's just because although it is out of the water, it's not necessarily it's gonna be so saturated that it's going to take on some ice, and it's gonna look kind of like that. So we'll let that dry. I dumped a little more there than I want, so I can't do anything about it now because everything around it is wet, and all I'll do is just dump that ice into something. So we're gonna give it a quick second. Okay, now the next thing that we're going to do is you're going to want to do this while the water is still wet. So after you've taken your brush and you've moved this to make sure that you don't have any areas that should have water that don't have water. And what I mean is the product has a surface tension to it, just like water does. And if you don't tease it into some of your corners, it may bubble up and give you an unrealistic edge. And so I can see one right now that I don't like here. And so you can see right here that this water, maybe you can see it, kind of stopped short of where it should be. So all we're going to do is we're just going to tease that edge out. The water will find its own level once you break that surface edge there, but now that edge looks correct. So if you notice anywhere where your water is not all the way to the edge where it should be, just tap it a little bit. You'll get it to flow where you want it to, and then that'll take care of your problem. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is we need to get a little bit of white paint, and we're going to take that white paint and we're going to mix it with some realistic water, and I'll show you what happens when we do. Okay, the white paint I'm using is nothing expensive, nothing creative. It is simply apple barrel. You can get this at Walmart. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to set the camera down, and I'm going to show you how we pour this and direct it so that we get an ice effect where we want it. So give me a second here to relocate this. I've already mixed it. This is simply white paint with some of the realistic water poured into it. There's nothing else in there. And let's get started here. Okay, some folks may put this directly into their, put the paint directly into what they just poured. I don't like to do that. I like to do it as a separate layer. And as you can see, it's just going to come out with a little bit of coaxing there. And we want to kind of control it because we don't want ice everywhere, right? I mean, it's not, you're still going to have water that's flowing. And so not everything is going to be frozen over. And you can decide where you want it and where you don't want it. And that, the really cool thing that you can do after that is you can move it around. And you can tease it into a more natural. And this is why I like to do this when the top layer is of the water is still kind of wet, because it's not floating. It's floating on top with you, right? So you can move it around and you can position it where you want it. You can do this in multiple layers and sort of just put it up, you know, on its own, over the top, like I think that's how Woodland Scenics actually shows it being done. I like this ability to just sort of mix everything in and get it where I want it. Now, one thing that you gotta remember is how ice forms. So your water is moving this way, right? And your ice is gonna be forming without any sharp edges facing in this direction. So just by teasing this with this brush, I'm gonna go ahead and put the ice where I want it. And then once I've got that where I want it, I'm gonna bring you back here and show you what the end result looks like. Okay, after you've played with your white paint, you're gonna notice a couple of things. One, you're going to notice that if you put it on a little bit too early, some of your paint pigment may sink. And that actually happened to me, and I can tell you right there's where it happened. And you see how you basically have what looks like two different layers of ice on the surface, right? And don't get too worried about that, because you can do a very simple trick like what I did here. And that is I take that very small brush, put a very little bit of white paint, straight white paint, don't mix it with anything, and let it drift off the brush into your water material. And it's going to flow around a little bit, and you can tease it into the location that you want it, but it's going to give you a nice variation of ice that's very thick and ice that's maybe not so thick. All right, and it gives you a very cool look to it. Very realistic, very natural. Sort of let the paint go where it wants to go. Maybe just guide it a little tiny bit, and you can get something that looks just like this. Now, we're not done. Of course, we're not done. There's always something more that we can complicate it with, right? But what we're going to do is we're going to let all of this dry and cure. I recommend overnight, as long as it takes. And then we're going to come back, we're going to add some ripples and finish this off with just a little bit more of course, the ice sparkles, a little bit of ripples, just to give it some motion. But right now, leave it alone, don't touch it, let it do its thing. There is virtually nothing you can do to this at this point, except screw it up by playing with it. So leave it alone, let it go, come back when it's dry. Okay, so we have come back here next day, and we've let this riverbed dry. And as you can see, we've got some interesting natural patterns here that have developed from the white paint and the realistic water. So what we want to do now is we want to finish this off, and we want to give it all a ice shine. So what we're going to do is we're going to take where we have our white paint, we're going to use a brush, and we're going to put on a very thin coat of realistic water. Now, we want this to be smooth. We don't want there to be ripples or any kind of water effects in this. We want it to just be a nice, smooth layer. You can give it everywhere. I was trying to keep it just where the white paint is, but it won't hurt if it gets in other places. And I'm betting you can probably guess what product is coming next. That's right, we're going to bring back our ice sparkles. And we're going to use those just enough here to give that an icy show. Now that we've got the ice sparkles opened, which was a two-hand process, which is why you lost the camera there. Just going to take a little bit here and we're going to sprinkle it on. And I'm not trying to coat it, and I'm not trying to get everywhere. Just a little bit where the white paint is. And I'm kind of using it as a blending medium so that some of those weird patterns that develop that don't look as natural as some of the other ones we can get rid of. But when you see ice, you notice that it does take on different patterns depending on how it froze and how it, some of it freezes a little bit thicker than others, and you will get sort of a, I guess it's almost like a texture. So when you're done, you will get something that looks, let's see if we get the light on here for you so you can get an idea of what our frozen lake looks like. And that's what we want to see when we're done. Okay, so here is our diorama. I've got my stream iced over, some little bit of area where the ice hasn't set yet. If you have running water, you've got a river feature that isn't totally iced over like mine is, your next step would be to add some water ripples to show that movement in the water. And I was going to do that until I realized that based on how I ended up forming this and where I ended up putting my ice, there is just a little bit too much ice built up. So there's not going to be a whole lot of running water. You're not going to really see ripples. I may put a little bit in down here, maybe. It doesn't really need it right now. So that would be a step that you would do if you had a bigger water feature or less ice. Either way. I went for a little more frozen. That's fine. Okay, so at this point, we've pretty much covered all of the topic except the last step. And the last step is the most important step. It really brings things together. And that is this notched snow. Now, knock is you can find all this material. Now, it's something I should point out. All of the material that I have showed you is stuff that is readily available on the market. I know, like Model Railroader and some other places have used products in their articles that you can't get anymore. And they tell you in the article, I can't get this anymore. So I don't know why you would even run that article, because it's literally something you guys out there can't do. But everything that I've shown you is something that I've bought within the last 6, 7, 8 months. So it's all available stuff now, with the market and the world being what it is. They may be temporarily unavailable, but it's all available. So what our last step is sifting this snow, and we're just going to use a strainer, normal kitchen strainer, through all of this stuff, and it's very simple. And we're gonna cover the area. So I'm gonna put the camera down. I'm gonna show you that. It's gonna bring the last scene together, and then we are going to be ready for the glamour shots. Okay, so this step is as simple as I made it sound. And all you're gonna do is you're gonna take this powdered snow, you're gonna put it into the sifter, just like that, and you are going to gently sift it from a little bit of a distance, and you just cover everything. I mean, it goes over all the areas where you have snow. And the reason I like this is, one, it has a sparkle that no other snow product that I've used has, and it adds this light and fluffy layer of snow on the top that is just it's just perfect for capturing that winter feel. And it's more of a wet looking snow, but it definitely is the best product that I have found. Now, Deluxe Innovations has a product that I haven't used yet. I've seen it used. It actually looks pretty good. So I would like to give that a shot before I tell you that this is the absolute best one. But it does stick to everything, and typically when I use this product, I do not seal it. So I usually keep it away from my tracks. It just doesn't. It doesn't do well with any kind of adhesives. I've tried some like dry. I don't want to say like dry spray, but like uh, sort of the spray glues and spray glosses, and I put that down first, and I try to catch it, while it's still wet. But it doesn't look as good. It loses its fluff that we keep trying to get. So I typically leave this loose on top, and it does get funky after a while and needs rejuvenated. Like I said, it's just one of those things. I haven't found a better product. It does have a little bit of a sticking quality to it, so it will stick to your scenery. So as long as it's not somewhere where you're constantly touching it, it'll stay on its own, and it'll stay. I keep it away from the tracks and the moving parts, but it just adds a very nice finishing touch. And that's why I don't get too particular about the granular details of the woodland scenic stuff, because I know I'm going to use this as a final step and sort of smooth it out, so it's all good. So, all right, I think at this point we are ready to do some final shots.